In the summer of 1981, David Bowie was in Montreux. Queen were in Montreux recording what would become the Hot Space album. They ended up at the same dinner, the specific kind of meeting that happens in a city like Montreux in the summer, where the music industry's most significant people move in a concentrated geography and someone always knows someone who knows someone. And then they ended up in the same studio. Not planned, not the result of a formal collaboration proposal or an industry negotiation or a meeting of managers. They ended up in the same studio because they were already in the same room and the studio was there and it seemed like the right thing to do. 72 hours later, Under Pressure existed. It went to #1 in the United Kingdom and became one of the most recognized opening bass lines in the history of popular music. And then came the part that nobody talks about as much as the creation story. Who owned it? Who controlled it? What the rules were, and what happened when one of the two men was no longer alive to enforce them. The song was made in 3 days. The argument about who it belonged to lasted for the rest of both their lives. David Bowie and Freddie Mercury in 1981 were two of the most significant figures in the history of British rock, not by retrospective consensus, but by the immediate, present-tense recognition of their contemporaries. Bowie was 34 years old and had spent the previous decade redefining what a rock musician could be with a consistency and a completeness that had no parallel. Ziggy Stardust, Aladdin Sane, the Berlin Trilogy, the specific quality of someone who had reinvented himself so many times that reinvention had become the stable identity. Freddie Mercury was also 34. He had spent the previous decade building Queen into one of the most successful live acts in the world and writing some of the most technically ambitious popular music of the era. Both men were performers of extraordinary theatrical intelligence. Both understood performance as something closer to transformation than entertainment. And both were, in the summer of 1981, in a period of active artistic evolution, Bowie moving away from the electronic experimentation of the Berlin years. Queen in the middle of the hot space sessions that would push them into funk and dance territory. They met at a dinner. They went to the studio. They made something. The recording of Under Pressure was not a premeditated collaboration. Reinhold Mack, who was producing the Queen hot space sessions at Mountain Studios in Montreux, has described it in various accounts as something that emerged from the specific energy of a group of highly talented people finding themselves in the same space with instruments available. The famous bass line John Deacon's contribution, one of the most imitated and most recognizable bass lines in rock history, was not composed in advance. It emerged from a jam. The song that grew around it, the call and response between Bowie and Freddie Mercury, the specific tension between Bowie's contained delivery and Freddie's explosive range, the lyric about pressure and human connection that Bowie and Mercury shaped together as the session found its direction, was not the result of weeks of planning. It was the result of 72 hours of work in a studio where two of the most creatively productive people alive had found themselves at the same moment. The session was long, it was intense, it was not particularly comfortable. But what came out of it was unlike anything either party had made before, and both of them knew it when they heard the playback. John Deacon played the bass line. He played it in a jam, without knowing it would become one of the most recognizable bass lines in the history of popular music. Freddie Mercury and David Bowie built the song around it, together, across 72 hours in a studio that neither of them had planned to share. Nobody in that room knew what they were making. They found out when they heard the playback, and then they spent the next 10 years working out who it belonged to. The relationship between David Bowie and Freddie Mercury was one of the most creatively charged in British rock, and also one of the least examined. They had known each other for years. They moved in overlapping worlds, shared sensibilities about performance and persona, and had a mutual respect that was genuine and occasionally complicated by the competitive instincts of two very large creative personalities. Bowie found Freddie Mercury's flamboyance both impressive and slightly exhausting. Freddie Mercury found Bowie fascinating in the way someone finds another person fascinating when they operate from entirely different premises and arrive at unexpectedly similar conclusions. They were not close friends. They were colleagues with a specific creative chemistry that neither replicated with anyone else. The Montreux session was the only time that chemistry was captured on record. The lyric of Under Pressure is about pressure in the specific and personal sense, the pressure that people put on each other, the pressure that the world puts on individuals, the specific human difficulty of loving and being loved under the conditions of ordinary life, which are not ordinary at all, but brutal and beautiful in equal measure. The line, "This is our last dance," and the line, "Why can't we give love one more chance?" are not the lines that a studio session produces when two performers are simply going through the motions. They are the lines that emerge when two people with something real to say find themselves in the same room with enough time and enough trust to say it. Bowie shaped the lyric toward the political and sociological. Freddie Mercury shaped it toward the emotional and the personal. The result is both. A song about the world and a song about people in the world, held together by a bass line that John Deacon played in a jam on an ordinary afternoon in Montreux, and that has not stopped being heard since. The agreement that Freddie Mercury and David Bowie reached about Under Pressure after the Montreux session was specific and has been consistently reported across various accounts of the song's history. The agreement was this: neither party could release a remix or any new version of the song without the explicit approval of the other. Both names were on the writing credit. The song was credited to Queen and David Bowie. All five of them, and the control was mutual. Neither party could do what they wanted with it unilaterally. For the period when both men were alive, this agreement held. Under Pressure existed as it was recorded, was released as it was recorded, and was not subjected to the specific indignities that commercially successful songs sometimes suffer when one party or another decides to revisit them without the other's full participation. The agreement was, in the context of how collaborative recordings are managed in the music industry, unusually clean. It held because both parties enforced it. Two creative giants. One agreement. Neither could touch the song without the other's permission. For the entire time both of them were alive, neither did. The agreement was a form of mutual respect enforced by mutual self-interest. And it held absolutely across 10 years until one of them was gone. And then the question of what the agreement meant when only one party remained became the question that Brian May has never quite finished answering. Before considering what happened to Under Pressure after Freddie Mercury's death, it is necessary to consider what happened to Under Pressure while he was still alive, specifically the 1990 release of Ice Ice Baby by Vanilla Ice, which sampled the Under Pressure bass line without clearance. The sample was not cleared. The credits did not acknowledge Queen or Bowie. Vanilla Ice's initial public response, the claim that the bass line was different because it had an additional note, became one of the most widely mocked defenses in the history of music copyright disputes. The legal resolution required Vanilla Ice to pay an undisclosed settlement and add the songwriting credits retroactively. Freddie Mercury was still alive when this happened, and while his public response to it was not extensively documented, the incident is notable for what it demonstrates about the bass line's cultural penetration. Within 9 years of its first appearance, it was so embedded in the cultural memory of popular music that a producer could sample it expecting audiences to recognize it immediately, which they did. The wrong person had used it, but the recognition itself was evidence of what John Deacon had played in a Montreux studio in 1981. After Freddie Mercury died in November 1991, the bilateral agreement became unilateral. Bowie could now do things with the song he could not have done with Mercury alive to veto them. At the 1992 Freddie Mercury tribute concert, Bowie performed Under Pressure with Annie Lennox in front of 72,000 people at Wembley. The performance was extraordinary. Brian May has spoken about it warmly, but with something more complicated beneath the warmth, the acknowledgement that, under the original agreement, it would have required Freddie Mercury's approval. Freddie Mercury could not give approval. He was the reason they were all at Wembley. And Bowie sang their song in the tribute without the person whose tribute it was. The specific quality of Under Pressure as a recording is inseparable from the specific quality of the two voices that made it. Bowie's vocal approach in 1981 was contained, slightly ironic, operating with the distance of someone who observes rather than participates, the specific Bowie mode of the early 1980s, present and engaged but always with a quality of deliberate remove. Freddie Mercury's vocal approach was the opposite. Total immersion, maximum exposure. No ironic distance between the singer and the thing being sung. The contrast between these two approaches, held in tension across the same song, trading lines, building toward the same emotional climax from completely different directions, is the whole of what Under Pressure is. Neither voice alone could have made what the two voices together made. Bowie's containment without Mercury's release would be too cold. Mercury's release without Bowie's containment would be too much. Together, they produce something that is exactly the right temperature. John Deacon's bass line runs underneath both of them and holds everything in place. One voice contained, one voice released, neither sufficient alone. Together, exactly right. This is the specific chemistry that 72 Hours in a Montreux studio produced. And it is the specific chemistry that the death of one of the two people made irreplaceable, because Freddie Mercury's voice and David Bowie's voice in the same song at the same time is an event that happened once and cannot happen again. Under Pressure is the record of an event that can never be repeated. That is the thing it contains that no other recording contains. David Bowie died in January 2016, 2 days after the release of his final album, Black Star. He was 69 years old. He had spent the years since the Montreux session building a career that continued to produce extraordinary work up to its final moment. The Black Star album, recorded in full knowledge of his imminent death, is a companion piece to Under Pressure in a way that Bowie himself could not have anticipated in 1981. The work of someone who knows time is running out, who chooses to make music rather than anything else, who leaves the finishing to the people who will still be here. The specific irony that both Bowie and Freddie Mercury ended their careers with recordings made in the full awareness of their own mortality, both leaving posthumous works that became testaments, is not one that either of them planned. But it gives the arc of their careers a specific symmetry that the Montreux session stands at the center of. Two people, one song, made in 3 days. The rest of the arc built from that point outward. Under Pressure went to #1 in the United Kingdom when it was released in October 1981. It has been on the radio, in films, and television programs, in stadiums and arenas, and living rooms and headphones and public spaces, continuously for more than 40 years. It has been sampled, covered, referenced, and played at the funerals of people who found in it the specific articulation of something they could not say in any other way. The bass line that John Deacon played in a jam is now one of the most recognizable sounds in the history of recorded music. The song is larger than either of the artists who made it, which is the specific quality that the greatest collaborations produce. Something that exceeds what either collaborator could have made alone, that belongs not to either of them specifically, but to the shared space between them. That shared space was Mountain Studios in Montreux in the summer of 1981. The song is still in that shared space. It has not left it. You can hear in every performance of it the specific quality of two people who were not supposed to be in the same room, finding themselves in the same room, and making something that could only have been made in exactly that accidental, unplanned, unrepeatable way. David Bowie died in January 2016. Freddie Mercury died in November 1991. The bass line John Deacon played is still playing. The agreement they made neither could touch the song without the other's permission outlasted both of them. What they made in 72 hours has outlasted everything. That is the specific and irreducible quality of Under Pressure. Not that it was made by two of the greatest artists of the 20th century. That it was made by accident, by proximity, by the specific alchemy of two people in the same room who did not plan to be in the same room, and found in that unplanned proximity something neither of them had and neither of them could have found alone. Freddie Mercury and David Bowie were in the same studio for 72 hours in the summer of 1981. They made Under Pressure. They agreed that neither could do anything with it without the other's consent. They kept the agreement until one of them could no longer keep it. The song is still there. John Deacon's bass line is still there. The two voices are still there, contained and released, cold and warm, together producing the exact temperature that neither produced alone. David Bowie is gone. Freddie Mercury is gone. Brian May still plays the song at Queen plus Adam Lambert concerts. He has spoken about it with the care and the weight that he brings to everything that touches Freddie Mercury, and with an additional quality that belongs specifically to Under Pressure. The care of someone who was in the room when it was made and who has been living with what it became ever since. The accidental is sometimes the essential. The unplanned is sometimes the permanent. 72 hours in Montreux, and then the rest of music history trying to catch up with what those 72 hours produced.